Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Honeybee Stamps. In today's video we are going to create this slimline card featuring the Enjoy the Ride stamps and dies. I'll also show you how I made this rainbow Parisian scene, which is the perfect backdrop for these cute little beret wearing bunnies. I'm going to start with the Enjoy the Ride stamp set. As you can see, the stamp set not only includes the cute little bunnies on the bike, but also includes some bunnies on a scooter. I'm first going to stamp my images onto some white cardstock in Honeybee's new Intense Black ink. This is a Copic friendly ink and it stamps so dark and so beautifully. So after I stamped one beret, I'm going to stamp a second one. I want both of my bunnies to be wearing a beret. So I just repeated that process, inked it in Intense Black and stamped it. Now that my ink is dry, I'm ready to Copic color. I have several Copic markers here picked out, and the markers I'm using are on screen. I'm going to start with the bunny, starting with E30 or E30, coloring the whole bunny except for his tail. Then I'm moving on to my darker shade, which is E31, and just adding a shadow any part where I think would be a little bit shaded. Then I'll go back to my E30 and just blend that out a little bit, that transition between the dark and the light. I have a couple pinks picked out for the ears, and then a really light blue to add a little shadow on the tail to kind of keep that tail white looking. Now I'm going to move on to the bike. Starting with BG0, I'm going to color all the bike pretty much with this light blue color. I'm not going to color the handles or the pedals or the basket. Now moving on to my darker shade, BG05, adding a little shadow to all those blue bike parts, so this gives it a little bit more depth, a little bit more shape. And then after I add that darker color, I go back with my BG01 and just kind of blend it out a little bit. Now I'm going to BG10, which is what I use for my whites. It's what I used on the bunny's tails, and just added a little shadow to the handlebars and the pedals. Then colored with two grays here on the bike pedals or the bike handles as well. Now moving on to the basket, starting with E35, which is kind of a light brown, and then a really dark brown with E29, and then I'll go back to that E35 and blend it out a little bit. Got a little sloppy here, so I'm cleaning with my colorless blender. And then all I have left to do here are the berets, starting with C5 for kind of the base. Basically, just going to make these black berets. And then C7 for that shadow. And after I color that shadow area in, I'll blend it back with the C5 just to kind of soften that transition. So with my all my images colored, I went ahead and die cut them out with the matching dies. Now I'm going to quickly adhere those berets on to the bunnies' heads. I think this is just a nice touch and does definitely make it feel more Parisian. Now that those guys are done, I'm going to move on to my background, starting with the Paris Skyline Scene Builder dies. This die set comes with 6 kind of buildings, one of them being the Eiffel Tower. I'm going to die cut them out of a rainbow of scrap colored cardstock. I did die cut one of the houses twice, so I have actually 7 die cuts. Then I die cut those houses one more time out of white cardstock, and now I'm just going to adhere my colored cardstock onto the white cardstock to give it a little bit more strength and a little bit of dimension, just a little bit, because I feel like it's a little flat just laying adhered right to the background. So I repeated that process for all of my 7 buildings, and now I'm ready to move on to my ink blended part. So I'm going to use the Paris Skyline background stencil. This stencil has several parts that you separate with your scissors before you ink blend, which I've already done. I'm going to ink blend them over a panel. This panel is a little bit smaller than a Slimline panel. It's 3 3/8 by 8 3/8. I'm going to position these 2 sections of the stencil to kind of make one continuous line or one continuous skyline. And once I have everything in place, I then taped down with some Micropore tape, including the panel itself, just so it didn't shift around on me. And now I'm simply ink blending that skyline, creating a little gradation where it's darker right up against the stencil and getting lighter as I work my way down to the bottom of the panel. And I'm using tumbled glass distress oxide. Once I finish ink blending, I can go ahead and remove my stencil and all my tape, and now I'm ready to adhere my little buildings. So I'm first going to arrange them, of course, in rainbow order. Once I get them all in place, I'll then grab a big piece of press and seal, and I will place this right over all those buildings to pick them all up. I do want to note that I have the Eiffel Tower right now a little bit over or on top of two of the buildings, and I'll address that kind of height difference when we flip it over here. So I just quickly picked all of those little houses or little buildings up, flipped over my big press and seal, and here we're going to address that kind of difference in depth or in dimension because it's on top of those little buildings. So I've grabbed two more, or die cut two more Eiffel Towers, and I'm just going to adhere those together. And I did two because the buildings it's on top of are 2 layers thick. So I need to compensate that by adding 2 more layers to the Eiffel Tower. And where they overlap with the Eiffel Tower, I'm going to cut that out of my new stack of Eiffel Tower die cuts. So I just trimmed those areas out. Now I'm ready to add some liquid adhesive to the back side of that Eiffel Tower, place it right down, and now they'll all be flush when I adhere this to my card or to my panel. So I'm ready for the glue, so I'm going to go ahead and add the liquid adhesive all over the backside of all these buildings, and then I'm ready to pick up my piece of press and seal. And the nice thing about press and seal is you can look through it too, so I'm going to kind of look through it and get these buildings in the right place. And when I'm there, I'll press it down, and then I will immediately remove the press and seal because I only have a small window of time here to just do some fine tuning and fine adjusting of that liquid glue before before the glue rather sets. So I'm just going to fine tune these buildings, just kind of move them around, straighten them out a little bit, and that will complete that panel. Now I'll flip it over and I'm going to trim off that overhang of the Eiffel Tower, and now we're ready to move on to our sentiment. So I've got my panel here in my MISTI. I do have my bunnies here and a sentiment from the Enjoy the Ride stamp set positioned. I'll remove my bunnies, then pick up that sentiment, and I will stamp it in intense black ink right at the top there. Once I have that stamped, we're basically on home stretch here. I'm going to first adhere this panel on to my Slimline card base. My Slimline card base is 4 1/4 by 8 5/8, and then scored at 3 5/8. And I just added some liquid glue to the back side of my panel, center it here. It has a nice border because again it's a little bit smaller than a Slimline panel. And then all I have to do now is adhere my rabbits. I did add some foam adhesive to the top of their heads and the bottom of the wheels, and I'll just stick them right down onto my card front, and my card is complete. And I'll hold this card up to the camera so you can get a good look at all the details in this fun card. I really love how it turned out. It's a pretty clean and simple card, but it really does have a fun and happy feel to it. And even though this set was originally intended for Valentine's Day, I think this would be a really cute card to send to a friend, especially now that it's summer and people are starting to travel again. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I used, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.